Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. Today's guest is Helen Davies. I had the pleasure of meeting Helen at recent networking I attended in person. Helen was the first person I actually spoke to as part of the networking group as we moved around the tables. And what struck me was the fact that Helen had a card that said Bones for Life. Now, I'm all for helping myself be the best possible, infused, energized, and healthy person I can possibly be. But it had never occurred to me that my bones might not be as good as they could be. Who really thinks about their bones? Helen has a program specifically designed to stimulate bone strength. And she's got a really interesting story as to why she now has that program in place. So over to you, Helen. Please tell us a bit about why Bones for Life.
Hi, Karen. Well, thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here today. So the first thing I have to say is I can't take credit for the name Bones for Life. It's not something I created. It is a program that I have trained to teach and that I now deliver. The reason that you and most of your listeners will never have heard of it is that it's very little known. That's not very good English, but you know what I mean. It's not well known here in the UK. In fact, unbelievably, I'm one of just 40 people or so at the moment teaching this program here. And I think I'm probably the one making the most noise about it when it comes to social media and things. So if I just start by just telling you a little bit about who I am and what I do, because this is part of what I do. So as I say, or as you said, my name is Helen Davies. My business is One Step Forward because that's what I help people take. And I have two sides. So one side of the business is Bones for Life. I used to teach yoga. I now teach this instead. So we are talking here about a movement program. And I know we're going to be talking more about it. So just for completeness, the other side of my business is that I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. And I specialize in medical hypnosis and the mind-body connection. So I support people who are going through surgery. I help people manage chronic health conditions and address the emotional issues that underpin pretty much all of our physical manifestations of disease and illness and ill health. And so everything I do through the hypnotherapy, through the Bones for Life movement program, is about helping people become an active participant in their own healing. And both of these things, and indeed the yoga that I used to teach, they're all things that I teach because they have changed my life. They have helped me heal over the years. And I'm now passionate about sharing what I've learned with other people.
Well, that makes sense. I understand hypnosis, and I'm all in agreement with you that our mind-body connection is connected to emotions. And if we deal with those emotions, we can heal ourselves anyway. So I'm very much in alignment with that. But tell me, how did you become involved with Bones for Life?
Sure. So the story starts, or this bit of my story starts about 2.5 years ago, spring 2022. And at that point in my life, I was teaching yoga. I had a massive left swerve in my career. I spent 20 years as a business analyst. I got chronic health conditions, chronic fatigue, ME, whatever we want to call it. And that led to the hypnotherapy and the yoga teacher training because those were the things that helped me to recover. So 10 years on from that, I thought everything was going swimmingly. I reckoned I was fitter and healthier than I'd ever been in my life because I was a yoga teacher. And I was just getting on with things. And one day, it was a Sunday evening, about 6:30 on a Sunday evening, I was pottering around my kitchen. And it's important for the story to know that I live alone. At the time, it was just me and my little dog. And I went to move from my kitchen into the next door room, which happened to be the conservatory. There's a little step. And I was walking a bit too fast, which is a habit I am trying to wean myself off. And it was a Sunday evening, I was wearing a pair of sloppy trousers and I trod on the other leg of my trousers. So basically, as I was walking a little bit too fast, I basically tied my feet together. And as is inevitable in that situation, I crashed to the floor. As we instinctively do, I threw my arms out in front of me. And as I lay there on the floor in excruciating pain in my arms, I managed to roll to the side and raise my arms up, and I could literally see that my wrists, there was something very wrong. And the bottom line was I had broken both my wrists.
Oh, and you're living on your own?
On my own. It's Sunday evening, and it's just me and the dog. And this is why I can never tell any story without talking about the two sides of my business, because what I actually did, and we're not going to dwell on that today, but what I actually did there and there was bring in all my hypnotherapy skills to stop myself from going into shock, to turn the pain down. I literally numbed my arms so that I could focus on what I needed to do. And I was incredibly lucky. My phone was lying on the floor. So basically, I'd been in my kitchen. I was currently in my conservatory, and my kitchen is small. The other door from my kitchen, which is only a few feet away, goes into the room where my phone was lying on the floor charging. So I knew that I didn't have to go far to get to my phone. And I managed to kind of crawl on my elbows into the kitchen to get my phone. This was after a period, as I say, of just lying there, getting myself together, working out what I needed to do, and dial 999, call the emergency services.
How did you manage to do that with two broken wrists?
I realised, I think I had to flip the phone over. I'm not 100% clear about that, but I think I had to do that. So by this point, remember that, as I say, because of using my hypnotherapy skills, I've actually been able to turn the pain down. So I've numbed my arms. So I wasn't in excruciating pain at this point. I was able to cope. And I have no idea whether I lay there for 5 minutes or 25 before I moved. It wasn't 25, but it was, but I did a lot of internal work to, well, the first thing I did was bring saliva to my mouth, which is a really good trick for breaking that fight or flight response, hacking the nervous system, because our mouths go dry when we're in fight or flight. And so by bringing saliva to the mouth, it's exactly the same as slowing the breath down, but it's something that the body isn't expecting us to do because most of us don't realize we can. So I'd done all of these things. I managed to get to my phone. What I discovered, once it was lying dialing pad up, as it were, I discovered I could use the little finger of my right hand, and I could get enough pressure with the tip of the little finger of that hand to actually dial. So I called 999, and it's fine, you're in the queue. The ambulance will be there when it's there. And then I had to think, right, what am I going to do next? So the first thing I did was to phone a friend who I was actually planning to talk to later that evening, who is somebody I did my hypnotherapy training with. So I was able to contact her and say, I've been doing this for myself so far. You need to take over. Give me some suggestions, please. So she supported me. And then that gave me a chance to kind of come back to and get a bit more together. And then I had to start thinking through, okay, obviously I am not going to be here for the long term. I'm going to be taken away because my arms need attention. I have a dog. What's going to happen to the dog when I get put in the ambulance? And so I had to mentally go through my list of friends to work out, because the friend I was talking to wasn't even in the UK. So she was, she's incredibly helpful, but she was not helpful in practical ways. So I had to identify the person who I could call, who I did, and she was amazing. She lived 5 minutes drive from me, and she was in my house within 10 minutes of me phoning her, and stayed there for the duration.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did you open a front door with 2 broken wrists,
That's such a good
even
question.
though you weren't in pain. And I don't know about the listeners, but I'm sitting here going to myself, ouch, in a very visual way, I
Yeah.
can assure
And
you.
and when I say I wasn't in pain, what I mean is I wasn't in so much pain that I couldn't think. But,
Okay.
it wasn't like there's no problem. I can do whatever I need to do.
Hmm.
This is where having a dog was the most enormous blessing because my back door was unlocked and I have a back gate.
Oh, slightly.
So if I hadn't had a dog, I might well have locked the door up by that point, and that would have meant getting somebody trying to explain to someone where the key was hidden.
Yeah, we have to do that, even though we're not supposed to, but we
Exactly.
just pass over that point.
When there's no one else to have a key, if you get you lock yourselves out, you need an
Yeah.
emergency backup. Anyway, so I was able to say, and again, I remembered to say to her, in fact, I think she even had the presence of mind to say, how do I get in?
Hmm.
And so she was able to come around the back of the house. And then when the ambulance arrived, they were also able to come around the back of the house. But just as an aside, key safes, I hadn't realized how important they are for emergency service people. So if you haven't got a key safe, I really recommend getting one because A, it means that somebody else can't find it without the key, the number, and you can immediately give it to emergency service people.
That's very relevant because I live on my own and I have a cat. And rather than have to leave a key with somebody who might not be in when the person who is going to cat sit for me turns up, I have a key safe outside my front door. And it's been a blessing. But we don't think about things like that. And if we're women living on our own, that is vital. That's something that needs to be highlighted far more than it is.
Yeah,
As the same as you say, having the presence of mind to think, who can I phone? Personally, I think it's a good idea. And I actually have a couple of friends that if there's an emergency, even though they live a distance away, I do know that they will turn up for me, even if I'm having to wait nearly an hour for them to turn up. I know they will turn up. So the fact you had that accident is, for me, highlighting so many relevant points that the listener, whether a male or female, needs to be aware of if they live on their own. You were lucky enough to be able to get in your back door.
yeah,
A lot of people can't get into their back gardens or live in flats. So,
absolutely. No,
you
it's
know,
so true because I'd never thought about these things, but it's so easy for something, this was a ridiculous, avoidable accident, and it just happened in a split second.
well, this is it, isn't it? Split second. So, well done you for actually using your training and controlling your pain and having the presence of mind to take the actions and having those options, which was sheer fluke, basically. What then? Obviously, you landed up in hospital, you had your arm or wrist set, I presume. That made life very awkward.
Yeah, I had surgery on both wrists, which was actually a blessing because the surgery means I was only in casts for 2 weeks, not 6. I spent a couple of weeks with my parents, bless them, who stepped up. And then I went home again because that's what I wanted. And I thought, that was the worst thing that would have happened to me that year. It's like, I'm learning from this. This has been an amazing experience. My skills were really useful. Get on with life. So at the time all this happened, I was 56. And because I was a woman of a certain age who had broken a bone or two, I was referred for a DEXA scan. And to be honest, I was convinced it was a formality. I actually postponed it a couple of times because it took me quite a long time to be able to drive as far as I needed to get to the hospital, and I didn't want to bother anyone else, and all of that.
What's the DEXA scan?
Sorry, I should explain. Yeah, DEXA,
Sorry,
spelled
DEXA.
either DXA or DEXA.
Okay.
It's a bone density scan. So
Okay.
it's a light dose, as it were, of X-ray that is put through usually around the hip area to see how dense your bones are. And it's the only way we currently have of measuring bone. Well, I'm going to say bone strength. It's not measuring bone strength, it's measuring bone density, which isn't necessarily the same thing. But we can't, the only way you can measure the strength of something, anything, is to bend it until it snaps, and that's not really advisable when it comes to bones. So the only option we have is to measure the density, because the density, it's the bone mineral density. So that's the amount of the minerals, predominantly calcium, but there are plenty of others as well. And the more of those there are, so you may have, the more dense the bones are, and you may have seen photographs or images rather over the years of bones that look a bit like they've got a honeycomb center. So when they're dense, the little spaces, it's quite solid. And as they become less dense, they become more and more like the honeycomb sweets we all used to have. So the the DEXA scan measures that. I was so convinced that it was a formality for me that even when I was told that I was going to have a phone call to give me my results, it didn't occur to me that that was maybe a sign that there was possibly an issue. And I had a call from a nurse who told me that the results of my DEXA scan showed that my bone density was in the region of, or in the range of osteoporosis. Which means that the bone density is low, and low enough that fractures are more likely than would be expected from someone of my age.
That's a scary, what would I call it? I would call it an outcome, I suppose, because as you say, you weren't expecting such a negative response. How did that make you feel?
It was utterly devastating. I mean, basically, I was being told that my bones were crumbling. And she didn't use those words, but that's basically what they're saying. She did say, not once, but 3 times, it is not possible to improve bone density. You can only hope it doesn't get worse. Now, that is something that I and many, many other people strongly disagree with, but that is the official NHS line.
Yes, I'm not surprised you disagree, and I would certainly disagree because I take the attitude, and I'm sure you probably do, that if you're told something negative, it's what you're going to hang on to.
100%.
And your recovery rate from a negative outcome, first off, but then to be told there's no way of improving it is certainly not going to improve your mental health, let alone your emotional health. And then you're facing a situation where you are basically told there's nothing they can do for you. Get on with it.
Well, it wasn't quite that, because that's immediately followed with was, these are the drugs we recommend. So the drugs that are offered, and I'm not going to go into, I'm not medically trained and I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but the drugs that are offered don't, at the moment, based on current research that's available, the drugs don't improve bone density. They kind of freeze it where it is, so it's supposedly not getting worse. Now, over the prior 10 years, I'd been through the whole process of detoxing my system, changing the way I ate. I had to wean myself off very powerful drugs I used to take for my migraines that I'd developed a dependency on. So my instinctive response was, hold on a moment, I need to do my research into the drugs before I make any decisions.
And everyone should do their proper research, because
absolutely,
having been poisoned by antibiotics unwittingly by the hospital, it really does have a massive impact on your body, whatever drugs you're putting in it. So yes, and not being told, a bit like an Alzheimer's or dementia drugs that they use nowadays, they don't reverse, they just hold it. So you're actually partly placing yourself in a situation where you're not able to take action for yourself to actually improve your outcomes.
I certainly can't disagree with anything you've said. And I know there are plenty of people who have made the choice to take the drugs that are available, and I completely understand that. And if I'd been 20 or 30 years older, then I might well have made that choice. But in my 50s, with the possibility that newer drugs that work differently might evolve in the future, that I might then have the option of looking into if I wanted to, the research and doing my research into how they work and what they do and don't do, and also the potential side effects, I knew without question that I didn't want to take them. So You asked me how it all made me feel. I was utterly devastated. I was in tears on the phone. I cried for at least a week. I thought my life was over. As I mentioned briefly, I had a 20-year career I was a business analyst. My default in a situation where I'm being challenged is research. So once I'd picked myself up and stopped crying, at least some of the time, I started researching. And while I was researching, I came across this program called Bones for Life. And just as you did, I just saw the name and thought, this is something I need to know about. And this is where, things fall into place when we need them. So by this point, it was the end of April that I fell. It was the end of August I got my scan results. In September, I found a free online seminar event that happened to have a few Bones for Life classes in it. So I went to that. Within the first class I attended, I thought, I need to be doing this and I need to be teaching this. So remember, I'm already a yoga teacher. So the idea of learning to teach it is fairly straightforward, as long as I can find someone to teach me. In the interest of time, I'll jump forward because I had it took me quite a while to find anybody, because as I said, I'm now only one of 40 people in the UK teaching this. There is only one person in the UK who is training teachers in this program. And it took me a while to find her. But when I did find her...
That's a serious issue then for anyone who needs the kind of help. And as a yoga teacher, I would have thought that your bone density would have been quite strong, because yoga is all about movement, and surely movement improves your actual physical health. And I'm assuming, obviously wrongly by the sounds of it, that your bones would improve because you're actually physically doing those exercises that would improve the strength of the muscles and consequently the bones. But I'm obviously wrong.
So there are a whole different number of reasons why people can have low bone density. And in fact, if anyone is listening, if you go into Google and you just search bone density test, or how dense, bone density, if you Google bone density risks, you'll find a whole range of surveys, studies and questionnaires where you can put in your information and it will tell you your risks. So being female is a risk to start with, not because men's bones don't get less dense. We all start losing bone density in our mid-30s. That's how our bones work. And so basically, this is where I have to be careful, because there's so much information I can share, and I know we have a limited amount of time. But if I can explain very briefly the way that our bones work, as our bones experience wear and tear through daily life, through movement, like every cell in the body, our bone cells are being replaced constantly. And that wear and tear is needed. If you think about something we're all very familiar with these days, a pothole in the road. When you've got a pothole and you're going to repair it, you don't just chuck in the new tarmac on top of what's there. You have to take out all the rubbish that's accumulated to get a clean surface. So when our bones have a bit of wear and tear, there are cells called let me get this the right way around, osteoclasts, which are like the cleanup crew that come in and clear out all the debris. And then the osteoblasts come in, and they're the builders, and they rebuild new bone.
Okay.
And so as we're growing from our teens through our 20s, that rebuilding process happens faster than the breaking down, which increases the density of our bones. As we move into our 30s, mid-30s and beyond, there is a shift that takes place. And although that process still happens, the breakdown starts to outpace the rebuilding. And so our bones naturally become less dense. And that happens for all of us. For women, it's back to the usual problem or issue of hormones. As our estrogen levels fall off a cliff around perimenopause, menopause time, that accelerates the decline in bone density. And this is one of the reasons why, for people who choose to take HRT, one of the massive benefits of HRT that people, certainly I wasn't told about at this point, just as I'm, in passing, I was 10 years past menopause. I'd refused HRT because I thought it was just about wanting to stay young. When I did my research at this stage, I discovered it could have been helping my bones for the last decade.
Wow.
So I chose to go on to HRT 10 years after menopause to support my bones. The reason we see more women with osteoporosis than men is twofold. One is this issue that women have this acceleration around the changes in hormones. And the other is quite simply that because women on average have a longer lifespan, there are more older women around than older men. And so when you put those two together, there are a lot more older women with that distinctive osteoporotic stoop. But take it from me, when you start looking for it, there are an awful lot of men out there with it as well.
Yeah, you see them. You see that stoop. Or obviously men can break bones just as much as women. So.
Absolutely. And when it comes to breaking hips and things in the elderly, it's just as big a risk for men as it is for women. So Bones for Life. So basically, when I found the teacher who was teaching it, by this point we were into the autumn of 2022, her next 2-year course was starting in January, and I joined it.
2 years?
It's a 2-year teacher training course.
That's a lot of time and effort on your part then to actually learn it. Why does it take so long?
Well, it's not a full-time course. It's something that you do alongside. We met for a weekend every couple of months, and most of it was online. So and then we had work to do in between and so forth. It was, for me, it was on a par with the way I trained to be a yoga teacher, although that was all in person. It was less intense than that, actually. But for me, that was a really positive thing because it really helped us to understand the program fully.
Okay.
So I completed that at the end of 2024, but I started teaching a year before that with the blessing of in fact, I started teaching 6 months into my teacher training course because I said to my teacher, when can I start teaching? And she said, well, you're an experienced teacher, you're a good teacher, because she saw me teaching regularly. She said, you can start teaching tomorrow, just don't teach anyone something I haven't taught you yet, which seemed eminently reasonable.
Yeah.
So let me explain what Bones for Life is, because I keep talking about it and people are going, what on earth is it? If we come back to what I was saying about bones, the thing that our bones need for growth and strength, and this is coming back to the question that I've just realized I didn't answer that you asked me about yoga. Our bones need weight-bearing exercise and they need resistance. Now, the yoga that I practiced and the yoga that I practiced and taught, whilst it changed my life, it was slow, mindful yoga, and it was becoming more slow and more mindful over the years. And a lot of the yoga I did, actually, we would spend the first 30 minutes of an hour and a half class lying on the floor. And I was very influenced by something called the Feldenkrais method, which I'd come across through some of my yoga teachers, which is a little bit more well known than Bones for Life, but not a lot. And so what I realized, the more research I did into what our bones need, I realized that the yoga I was doing was not giving me the weight bearing and the resistance work that my bones needed. Now, the easiest way in terms of the way most people think of getting that weight bearing and resistance work is to go to the gym. And that is really, really good for your bones. It's a fantastic thing to do. The problem is I've always loathed the gym. And I knew that with the best will in the world, it wasn't something I was going to want to do. I may do it further down the line, but I thought if I can find something that is more like the practices I'm used to, but is specifically for my bones, that is going to be better for me because I'm more likely to actually do it.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Because we can have wonderful intentions, but if it's not something we're necessarily going to enjoy, we're certainly not going to do enough of it to benefit us.
Exactly.
I'm guilty of that where exercise is concerned. I used to love the gym, but then they shut it at 6 o'clock in the morning, I used to go for an exercise, and all of a sudden they just decided 6 o'clock was too early and we'll close it until 8. Well, that's too late for me, and I lost interest. But now that at 6 o'clock, I am up doing exercise because that suits me and that's what I love. So yeah, you've got to find that one thing that serves you. And obviously what you're telling us is something that some people can accept and others won't, but they have an option of going to the gym. Hopefully they're like that instead.
Exactly. So what our bones need for stimulation, to stimulate growth, is dynamic confrontation with gravity. So that's what weight-bearing exercise does. That's what resistant work does. It's sending the gravitational force rippling through the body. Bones for Life does exactly that, but it does it in a different way. It's a series of 90 different movement processes, which is just the word that was coined to use. So yoga has postures, PTs might work with exercises. In Bones for Life, we talk about processes. Some of them are really small and simple. Some of them get really quite complex, and you work your way through them. You don't have to know all of them by any means. You can get started with just half a dozen different things, or even a couple, and you can get moving. The simplest one is something called bouncing on heels. Now, if you do research into exercise to help bones, you'll find heel bouncing is quite often referenced. The woman who created Bones for Life, Ruthie Allon, brought all of these things together, and she was absolutely brilliant. She was a Feldenkrais teacher. I've just mentioned Feldenkrais. That was her background. She was one of the first Feldenkrais teachers when the method was developed, and she was a very senior teacher. As she got into older age, people started asking her if Feldenkrais was good for bone health, and she realized that while it's fantastic for flexibility and mobility, it didn't do anything for bones because, like the yoga that I was doing, it's mainly done lying on the floor. So she took everything she'd learned from the Feldenkrais method and brought in ways of creating that dynamic confrontation with gravity and rhythmic movement that sends the force flowing through the body, stimulates the bones, creates that wear and tear, which is what they need to keep being stimulated to grow as much as any individual body is possible. So I have no idea how much my bones can improve, but I believe by doing these processes on a regular basis, they will get as strong as they are able to get.
I presume then, based on what you're saying, and my instincts would suggest this is probably correct, it's like anything we do, get your words together, Karen. If we repeat something, it's like exercise. We can do exercise that strengthens our muscles, that enables them to improve. The more we do it, obviously, the more the muscles will work effectively. So based on that assumption with the body, I would assume then by actually working to create resistance within the bones themselves, because of the nature of how bones are formed, from what you're saying. I might be wrong because my anatomy and whatever is somewhat missing. The more you do any kind of exercise that creates that resistance, the more your bones are going to improve, I would assume. So have you actually had your bone density read since you started this?
I haven't. That's because in this country, we only get it done every 3 years on the NHS, and I'm only 2 years into this. So
that's a bit worrying.
That's the way it works. It's like, mammograms, smear tests, all the rest of them. There is a cycle, a program. That said, I'm also very aware that if I do get an improved result, as I mentioned earlier on, I've been on HRT. No doctor is going to turn around and go, oh, well, that's got to be the Bones for Life that's doing this. They'll say that'll be the HRT. So actually, I'm very relaxed about what the scans show. And the other thing is, and I don't want to go into this because there's so much we could talk about here, but the DEXA scan is not particularly reliable. There are lots of reasons why results can vary. For me, The original DEXA scan, if I hadn't broken my wrists, I'd never have had the scan and I wouldn't know that there was potentially an issue. It's led me to something that is doing my body good. I have long let go of the fear around my bones, and I'm now getting on with things. And one thing that I really want to share, because this is so interesting, most people like myself come to Bones for Life because they want to make their bones more dense and stronger. What they actually find when they start learning this is that the benefits they get, because we don't know, we can't feel our bones, we have no idea if that's happening. The benefits we actually get are immediate. One of the key things in Bones for Life is all around posture. It's all very well sending that dynamic gravitational force rippling up through the body, but if your posture is poor, that force simply reconfirms the poor posture. So in order to get the benefit, the first thing you need to do is improve your posture within the context of what is possible for your skeleton. So we learn how to align our body in a way that years of practicing and teaching yoga, I never had these tools. Ruthie Allen discovered these incredible ways of teaching posture. And so our posture improves. We become more grounded, more centered, our balance improves. The single biggest reason that people break bones is not because they have low bone density, it's because they fall over.
Mm.
Now, it's the sort of thing that makes people go, well, duh, but actually it's totally true. If you don't fall over, for most of us, the risk of breaking bones is way, way smaller. So anything we can do that makes us more confident in our feet, more happy to go out and keep moving, because it's not moving is the worst thing for our bones. So anything that gives us that confidence to keep moving. So I always say to people, yes, do Bones for Life, but as well as that, make sure you're walking every day, even if it's just 20 minutes around the block. And then you can build some of these processes into your daily walk. This is one of the other things that's lovely about Bones for Life. With yoga, and again, yoga changed my life. I love it. But for yoga to really have an effect, you need to spend minimum of 20 minutes, preferably an hour or so, several times a week in one block. With Bones for Life, you can do a 5-minute process here, 5-minute process here, maybe a 10-minute one somewhere else during the day. If you're sitting at your desk and you realize your posture's really slumped, there's a couple of little quick processes you can do to improve that. You can drop it in throughout the day. And so it's really accessible. And ultimately, as I say, the bone health brings people in, but what keeps them doing it and practicing it is something that Ruthie Allen, who created it, called biological optimism. And that's that sense of confidence and joy and a realization that however old you are, whatever conditions your body is experiencing, it's always possible for your body to learn and improve. And one other thing I want to say, because I want to come back to what you said earlier on about muscles. The really fascinating thing about Bones for Life is it's not muscle training, it's brain training. What we're doing is changing the neural pathways and taking our body back to old, sometimes ancient patterns of movement that our bodies recognize on some deep level and that we've spent decades training ourselves out of. And this is why it's so effective, because we show the body a new way of doing it that feels better. And the more you let it do that, the more it starts to naturally want to repeat that rather than reverting to its old patterns.
So basically, it's a bit like fasting. If you look at the caveman, he would have fasted simply because he wouldn't have been able to get the food. But that fasting would have meant he had to move more, because he would have had to go hunting, or at least, preparing the ground for the harvest or things like that. So we actually have that ability, a bit like our own ability to heal. It's inbuilt in us from centuries ago.
Millennia.
Yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. I was
Yeah,
thinking of millennium, but yeah, millennia. So basically, what you're saying is Bones for Life is taking us back to that old knowledge.
100%. So why has osteoporosis become such a problem these days? It's
Sitting.
because we don't move.
We sit.
The chair was the worst invention for humankind ever.
Absolutely. And we sit in a
Sit all
car, we
day.
sit in the bus, we sit in planes.
Exactly. We even sit to move. It's crazy. The single most effective thing to support your bones is walking across the surface of the planet, ideally barefoot. And so, because most of us don't do that, we are creating ways of recreating that. And what I find, again, I found this myself and I see it over and over again with my students. The people that actually pick this up and really go with it, the first thing they say to me without fail is, I'm walking differently. And your walking becomes more fluid, more mobile, because our body is finding different ways of connecting. We all tend to walk tilted forward. We're always in such a rush to go forward to get where we're going. When we learn to improve our posture, every step is different and every step is sending that gravitational force rippling up through the body.
Tell me, it's a fascinating subject, and I could sit and talk to you for hours on this because this is the kind of thing that I consider is vital for women, especially because of the menopause and perimenopause need to know about. So, how do we get this information? How do we contact you? Or is there, even if we're just interested in learning more about it, what can we do about it?
So that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it really easy for people to find out whether this is something they want to do. And when I started looking into it, the only way I could learn Bones for Life was to sign up for a long-term course at quite a high price. And I did that because, it was my priority because of what had happened. But I knew I wanted to create something that made it really easy for people to test it, or to try it for themselves. So I've built an online self-study course, which is an introduction to Bones for Life. It's about six or so. It's just over 6 hours of content, and it's broken down into lessons that are anything from 5 minutes to 20 minutes long. So you can work your way through it. And there's a lot of information about the science that I was talking about, the background, how this program evolved, as well as the actual processes. And I sell that for just £99 because I want people to really give it a go. And if people like the idea of and I know a lot of people struggle with self-study courses. I've got folders upon folders of courses I signed up for and haven't done. So anyone who feels they want a bit more accountability, I also offer a membership where we do a monthly live class on Zoom. We have a conversation each month about aspects of what's going on. And for anyone who's in the Hampshire, West Sussex, Surrey area of the country, I also do in-person workshops and courses and things. So I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible for people. So there's information about all of that on my website. So my website is onestepforward.today. That's ONE, onestepforward.today. And you'll see there's a Bones for Life section on there. And that talks a bit about my story as well as all the ways people can work with me. And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for anyone who wants to make contact there. And I'm very, very open to people connecting with me, asking me questions, finding out a bit more about it for themselves. I just want people to give it a go. And I know you said before we started recording that you're really passionate about giving people the information before it's too late, learning in advance. And so the people who know they need to do what I'm doing are the people who, like me, have already been told there's a problem, or they maybe know that there's, yeah, the people let me say that again. The people who come to me because they immediately know they need what I'm offering are the people who already know they have a problem. I also want this to reach people who are prior to that. So perhaps people who know that their mother and grandmother have had issues with their bones. They recognize that they've lost a lot of height as they're getting older, because there is a hereditary element. Perhaps they've broken a bone, but they're too young, maybe even to have had a DEXA scan, because we don't tend to get offered them unless we're in our 50s. Even if there's no reason to think you may be at risk, if you learn these basic principles now and start building them into your life, you are reducing the risk of ending up where I did when you're in your 50s or later.
Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's taking the responsibility, being aware that the lifestyles we lead are not the best. And therefore, we need to find ways of helping ourselves ensure that as we get older, and I'm 67 now, and I'm probably the world's worst for getting out and about exercising or going even for walks, simply because of the nature of where I live. I have to walk along a very busy road to go anywhere, and it's like I'm not prepared to risk my life doing that because the roads are exceedingly narrow. I can go to woodland area, but it's often quite wet. I don't fancy landing up on my backside sliding down a hill. So there's not really that many places that I can go. So I'm probably now very conscious of the fact that I have the potential to have reduced the density of my bones because of it. And my whole approach to my own business and the reason for the podcast is to raise awareness that we have to look at how we're living.
Yes.
And take action. So on that basis, thank you so much, Helen, for being here and sharing your story, your experience, and giving us an answer of what we can do to help ourselves before we get osteoporosis, before we break a bone, because that is a clear indicator that we either are ungrounded and not taking care. And as you say, your accident was a fluke, but it highlighted a big issue for you. Hopefully, with the work you've been doing for yourself and the training you've been doing, you're not likely to experience that kind of harm to yourself in the future. But obviously, we will not know, and nor will you, because I'm not wishing you to fall over again, that's for sure. So ladies and gentlemen who are watching this, just be aware that there is so much information that's available nowadays to help you live a better life. And please, please take the time to get to know what you need to know for your future health now. So thank you, Helen, for participating. All Helen's details will be in the link below, and you can reach out to Helen. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you. And if you like what I share about myself and you can go on my website, karenbashford.com, and see how I help women and men improve their lives, then please reach out for me. So thank you for listening, and let's connect another time in a couple of weeks' time. Take care now. Bye.